to my team all the time about building empathy when you're working with folks. So whether that's an engineer that you're disagreeing with on a specific project, trying to understand why do they feel so strongly about pursuing a solution in this angle, or whether you're talking to a customer, right? Like trying to build empathy in every sort of interaction at work, I think makes you much more effective. It also actually makes life more enjoyable and fun.
Welcome to Lessons in Leverage, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of success. We'll help you unlock the secrets of leverage so you can amplify your impact in the world. Here's your host, Spencer Lowe.
Welcome back to another episode of Lessons in Leverage. I'm very excited today to have Terrence Bennett with me on the podcast. He's currently the CEO of DreamFactory Software, but he's got a really cool journey that I'm excited to dig into. He ran operations at Integrate.io. He was a member of Google's offensive security red team. And prior to that, he started out in the military, serving our country, the U.S. Navy. So Terrence, thank you for your service first and foremost. And thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Spencer. Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to chat. Looking forward to it.
So I would love to go back and start at the beginning of your journey. Did you know that you wanted to work in technology before you got into the service, or was that something you sort of discovered as you started out in the Navy?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've always loved computers. I've always enjoyed working with them, right? I sort of did IT tech support in the summers. In high school, I built my own computers, gaming computers, kind of just hobby computers. Back when that was a thing, I guess I'm kind of dating myself by saying that. But
what in particular you played? I played some of the worst ones. I was a big World of Warcraft guy when I was a kid.
Yeah, I liked first person shooters. So came up playing Doom, those kinds of things. We used to have, we call them LAN parties. Everyone bring their tower to someone's house. Yeah, I'm having flashback. Going to high school gyms to buy computer parts.
Yeah, that was. It's funny. I was joking with a friend just the other day about that LAN parties, how fun that was, and how it doesn't even make sense to kids today. Like, what you need a local network to just get online. What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's hilarious. It's crazy. So, I always loved computers. I did a little bit of programming and decided that wasn't the route I wanted to go. So I ended up at the Naval Academy. And the Academy is very much an education. It's kind of like a systems education and like a highly technical systems education. So even though I studied economics, which, I would argue is sort of systems thinking just at like a different level. You sort of take a full year of physics, a full year of chemistry, a full year of EE, take thermo, right? Like 3 semesters of calc, right? So it's pretty technical. So I always joke, I've got like the better half of an engineering degree. And that's where I wanted to stop. And then I got to a ship and I fell in love with engineering related work, right? Like being like an engineering officer, running a plant, working with teams that, day in, day out solve problems. And so, this is a little bit off topic from your initial question of, did I want to get into tech? But for me, it's all kind of this part of the same continuum, right? And then as an intelligence officer, once again, got involved in systems work. It's all sort of about, working with the team to solve problems, right? Finding them the resources and tools and everything else they need to complete, to solve a problem. And I guess it was at that point, right? And so here we're jumping from high school Terrence, 2002, 2003, to getting out of the Navy 2017 and deciding, okay, what am I going to do? And when I looked around, the most interesting problems to solve were tech. And I was sort of naturally attracted to that. So that's kind of, I guess that's how I think about it, right?
Yeah. I think there's a couple really good nuggets in there I want to highlight. I mean, you talked about one element, which is this concept of systems-based thinking, which is like, again, a lot of people, they just don't know where to start. They don't know, like, all right, maybe I'm not a programmer, I'm not techie. Maybe I didn't start from the standpoint of building my own computers. So but I can see that that's where the future is going. I can see that everything is getting more and more tech-enabled and tech-driven. It's like, where do I even start? Well, you came from economics and you have this way of thinking about the world that then you continue to build on, even as you were in the Navy, of thinking about how systems work together. And that's something I think a lot more people can relate to, and is this foundational skill. And then you added to that the second skill that you highlighted, which is working in a team setting to solve problems. That's another element of, modern businesses. It's a huge asset that we look for in people we hire, of like, can you solve a problem with the team? Because sure, maybe you're the smartest person and you get it and you can solve it, but can you help others? Can you work together collaboratively? That's a huge element too. Were there any other skills during that journey in the Navy that you feel like you maybe didn't know it at the time, but they started to become these building blocks that would prepare you for where you're at now?
That's interesting. I've always had a knack for going back to kind of systems thinking, almost like having like an intuitive map of whatever it is I'm looking at, right? So whether it was a computer network, right, or like a computer architecture, or whether it was literally like the low pressure air system of a DDG of a ship, right, or the clean water loop, you know what I mean, on a ship. I've always enjoyed being able to look at those kinds of systems almost in like a spatial reasoning way, right, and break them down to understand them. And I think I definitely developed those kinds of neural pathways, if you will, which interestingly, I would argue actually kind of maps well to thinking about like intelligence, right? And thinking through like how does an organization, this adversarial organization that I'm trying to understand, how do they work? How do they actually operate, right? Instead of just picking a few pieces of information and making an assumption, let's use some logic, right? And try and break down based on these pieces of information and what else I know. How does this actually fit into this like larger picture? And what can we deduce from that? Otherwise, right, I think like at a high level, the Navy teaches you how to lead, how to work with, frankly, challenging personalities. And I think every organization's like that. I think the Navy, by nature of literally putting like 300 people in a steel box and sending them out to sea, like forces you to get really good at that. Because every organization is going to have some tough personalities, but when you're literally like rubbing shoulders with them every day in the hallway, in the P-way as we call it, you're forced to work with folks in a very real way. And I talk to my team all the time about building empathy when you're working with folks. So whether that's an engineer that you're disagreeing with on a specific project, trying to understand why do they feel so strongly about pursuing a solution in this angle, or whether you're talking to a customer, right? Like trying to build empathy in every sort of interaction at work, I think makes you much more effective. It also actually makes life more enjoyable and fun because now you're building relationships, right? And that's, if we know anything about like human psychology and what makes us happy as people, it's building relationships, right? It's forging relationships and enjoying them. And we do 8 hours a day at work, right? Like I really hope everyone makes an effort to try and enjoy those 8 hours, right?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think that's a great point, that often we just focus on the hard skills and how that sort of starts to contribute to our success or as a necessary building block. But everyone I've met that I look up to, that I respect, that has accomplished things, has equally spent time building those soft skills and has figured out, I love that one you just highlighted, this concept of not always trying to be understood, but to first understand, to go figure out why do they feel the way they feel? Why are they so passionate? Why are they, instead of just, so much easier to just label it and be mad at them. It's like, they're just stubborn. They're just mean. They're just whatever. Put a label on it, slap it, get rid of it, ignore it, be mad at them. Now you're unhappy. It's not going to help you work with them. It's not going to get any results. And you didn't learn anything in the process. You didn't grow at all, which is another thing that we talk about, the psychological side and what makes you happy. I mean, growth feels good. And so we're all wanting to growth. We're wanting to contribute to something bigger than ourselves. We're wanting to meet these important human needs. And so how can I do that if I constantly just write everyone off and get mad at them because they're different, because they see things differently, because they have different backgrounds, skills, etc. And so when you think about that empathy piece, I love this idea. I've never thought about it before, that in the Navy, you're literally just stuck on a ship with these people. So you can't opt out, can't get around it. Work. How does that apply now as you're leading people in a situation where they aren't stuck on a ship, where they might not feel that same critical necessity, I must work through this? How do you replicate that for your team, and how do you teach them to be able to work through those conflicts?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's around asking a lot of questions, right? Like if you build an environment where people actually feel like their input's genuinely wanted, they'll tell you a lot.
Yeah.
And you very quickly learn about where there's friction points, right? And the term I use with my team all the time is that it takes all types. I don't want a marketer writing code, pushing code into production. I don't want an engineer writing marketing.
Yeah.
And I mean, actually the more extreme example of this is sales, right? Like I don't want engineers trying to sell, and I don't want sales trying to write code. And that's what they're both necessary for this whole thing to move forward, right? So let's all, if we have some conflicts, if we have some disagreements, like let's sit down and hash them out. Everyone.
The salesperson that understands how an engineer thinks is going to be a much better salesperson. I'm sure they're going to run into engineered-like people in the sales field that they're trying to sell to. engineer who really understands how salespeople think is going to be able to write better code. So that empathy and the asking the questions, I mean, it ends up translating to your core skill. It's easy to say, no, this is my core skill, so that's outside my lane. I don't have to do it. But it's amazing how much it ends up being complementary, even when that's maybe not who you are. You're not going to go be that salesperson, but understanding them, what could that teach you that could help you create something that's even better? So I love that. I love that framework. Well, I wanted to ask a little bit about, as you get out of the Navy and you decide, all right, tech's the best place to kind of take on these challenging problems, do what I like to do and solve these problems. How'd you end up at Google specifically? I'm sure there's a lot of people that are very interested in trying to land somewhere like Google, someone that's competitive and that has, some brand recognition. They want to maybe bolster their resume, or they want to learn a lot and go somewhere that has a lot of interesting problems to solve. So tell me about that journey and what skills you had to develop or that you used to be able to find your way into a competitive team there.
Yeah, no, great question. So I got out 2017. I thankfully, getting out of the service, there's increasingly all these great programs that as a transitioning veteran can get you in front of some of the right people, get you in front of people who can kind of help translate things for you. I actually did a program through Deloitte called Deloitte Core. It's just essentially like 3-4 days, but it was really helpful for me to start to kind of shift my mindset of thinking. And one of the speakers, I think he was Academy grad from Starbucks. And he said, the first question I ask every candidate is, have you read so-and-so's book about Starbucks? It's like the CEO's book. It's like the book on Starbucks. And if they say no, I assume the best, and I ask them if they've read this other book. That's like, if you read this one book, it's the second book about Starbucks. And if the answer is no, it's like, clearly you haven't invested in this interview. And the point being is, you need to take interviewing seriously. And just like an intelligence officer should dig through all the resources, a surface warfare officer should dig through all the pubs. Like, you need to do your research and understand these organizations. And guess what? People have literally written the book for you, right? It's right there for you. And so, that was kind of one of the first lessons I took, was that, hey, I'm going to look at a few organizations and I'm going to go deep and I'm going to read all. Google, it's literally called How Google, right? Like, you haven't read the book How Google Works. Like, you have no business applying to Google. I'm sorry. Like, you're just not there, right? First step, right? And so, those are some of the kind of, some of the thinking that I developed. But ultimately, right, I applied to Google and I got a quick rejection, even after having gone through like a resume workshop at the DC office, the Google office, and working closely with the Googler there. It's super competitive. I got a call back from what's called an administrative business partner, so essentially an EA recruiter. And she said, Terrence, we one of my colleagues from this other team sent me your resume. She said she saw you had a year of administrative support experience. So I'm curious if you'd be interested in interviewing for this other role. It wasn't what you initially applied for, but I think you could be a fit. And so, background is I spent a year as an executive assistant in the Navy. Essentially, they often take high-performing officers and they bring them up to the front office, the flagpole, and you get a year sitting next to the commanding officer or an admiral, learning about how the sausage actually gets made, learning about like how things actually get done. Kind of joking aside, like that experience is part of the reason why I decided, hey, maybe the Navy's not actually for me long term, because this doesn't actually look very fun. But great experience, and that's why the recruiter reached out, and it was not the role I wanted, but I took it and I interviewed and I got it because, that's essentially where I needed to start, right? A lot of folks, when you get out, say thank you for your service, but as an naval intelligence officer, no one knows what to make of that. They assume I'm like James Bond carrying around like a PP9 or something in my sock. They just literally have no clue what to make of that experience set. And so in some cases, you kind of start at the bottom, right? Essentially start in the mailroom, right? And so I did 2 years as an EA, working with a fantastic, just phenomenal manager and team. We grew his team 300% in a matter of 2 years. And I learned some scripting there. So I'd already done a little bit of programming, right? I taught myself Google Apps Script and started automating away a bunch of work. And that's actually, interestingly enough, that was the trigger that led to a bunch of people saying, hey, I think you've outgrown this role. Let's find something else for you. Which I thought was really kind of phenomenal. Google just inherently as a culture has an incredible ability to sort of move around the organization, move between roles. And some folks saw that and said, hey, like, let's find out what's next for you. And so I put in a package to transfer from essentially the EA role to program manager. And then I just jumped over to that red team. And that manager saw a very junior program manager, but they saw, 7 years of Navy experience along with, a bunch of time as intelligence officer, and said, hey, that's actually a phenomenal fit for this role. And so he joked that he sort of got me for a bargain, right? Like,
yeah,
but relatively junior salary, but was able to sort of punch him up by weight. So yeah, I don't know if there's any thread you want to pull there, but
yeah,
I certainly recommend that path for everyone. It worked for me, but yeah, there's no hack, right? There's no like secret phrase you put on your resume, right? Sometimes you got them.
And I think there's so much to unpack there that's valuable. I mean, the first thing is, one, you don't know ahead of time what the path's going to be. You can't chart. I'm not big on long-term plans. Like, I'm not big on people who have 10, 15, 20-year plans. If this is how everything's going to go. That's not how I am. I think you have to have very strong goals and very clear vision of, generally speaking, where you want to go. But along the way, you got to be ready to adapt. And you're not going to know exactly what's going to work. So you got to put out a lot of effort in a lot of areas, build the right skills, and all those things are shifting probabilities little by little to get you closer to this outcome you want. But the person who's like, have to go to Stanford and then to Harvard Business School and then to this executive position and this, like, you're going to be way more upset if things don't go exactly your way. It's going to be a lot harder. But if you're constantly building the skills and you are doing the right things, then you'll find these paths that up front aren't intuitive, aren't forethought, aren't planned, but then come together. And so the very first part I like about what you said that people I think can all apply and take from that is, when you get out of the service, you were able to use these organizations that help you transition. Well, what that did for you that I heard was, one, you got to figure out how to get in front of the right people. Because like, relationships are a huge element of getting any job or getting any opportunity. So you got connected with good people that could help you to understand things like, what opportunities are out there that align to your skill set, et cetera. Then you got to also translate that. You might have been in a job somewhere. These people listening to the podcast might be in a job right now as an executive assistant. And they're probably not thinking my next move is to program. But if you get the right skills, you acquire them over time, or they might be in a technical role and not thinking, oh yeah, sure, I'll take on an executive assistant or an administrative. It's not an intuitive move, but because you were ready and you built the right skills, then it was all able to translate into a larger goal that got you where you wanted to be. Maybe slightly slower, but all things considered, into a really good spot. And so I love that. So there was first the sort of making the right relationships. The second piece then was translating the skills. And then the third was being adaptable, which is this idea of you weren't accepted right away for the role you wanted, but you got your foot in the door, learned things along the way, kept building your skills. Some people might have got that job and said, great, I guess I'm in administration the rest of my life. But instead, start automating things away, showing that you have more capability, and then boom, more doors are opening. And so I just think there's so many elements there of building a career and really growing that can apply to anyone in any circumstance and can get you to that next level. So I think that was hugely valuable.
It's not obvious when you're doing it, right? I had multiple people tell me, Terrence, you're taking like 2 steps back here, right? Like, I was the senior watch officer at the NCIS's multiple threat alert center, right? It's like a senior intelligence officer on like a global watch floor, and I left that to join Google as an EA. And a lot of people were like, this doesn't seem right. Like, you shouldn't be doing this. And I was like, you know what? Like, he's a great manager, and I think I'm not going to be in this role forever, right? But I think it's a good fit for the time being. So
how did you develop the confidence in that moment to do that? Because this is something, there's a lot of people told you you're making the wrong decision. And this is, again, a commonality I see among successful people, where people around them are thinking one very linear path. How did you see it? What led to having that confidence to say, okay, I'm going to chart a path that's a little unconventional? How'd you have that confidence? Because I think a lot of people struggle. Like, if it's not the linear next step, what do I even do?
So it's funny. I wouldn't view it as confidence as much as the word grit's overused, but it's the only word that comes to mind right now. This is the background. I'm dyslexic. There's never been an easy path. Right? Like, everything that looked easy for that everyone else was doing was actually much harder for me. When you're dyslexic and you're handed like a 300-page book to read for whatever class, like the one thing you can be sure of is you're not going to just pick up that book and read it. You're going to think of a bunch of other ways to ingest that information. And it might be a combination of Wikipedia and audio and talking with, friends and study groups, but like the easy path is never actually the easy path. And I think I just learned quickly that like I can't do things the way everyone else does them. Like I have to chart my own path regardless. And if you do that long enough, it just becomes the comfortable thing. Well, the uncomfortable is just getting in line. What's uncomfortable is just like it's following advice because it just doesn't feel right. Because so many times that instinct, that traditional advice has completely and utterly failed you.
Oh, great. That's a great insight. And I think that this idea that you mentioned before of how you've always appreciated and had talent with visual representations, it's like, it probably, I mean, I'm just speculating, but it wouldn't surprise me if that comes back to this idea of if words are tricky and they, for so many people, words are the easiest way to communicate. So that's where they start, writing, reading, that's the easiest way. That's where people go. But then as you get into things like systems design and architecture, you find out that even if you're great at words and you don't have any limitation or frustration around that, pictures are still better. And so, in our company, we always require that our clients, we start with business process diagrams. It's like, yeah, we could write out a narrative. We want you to see each step and say, yes, this is what happens. No, this is not. And it's funny how fast people, when they see it in an image, go, oh, no, that's wrong. Oh, that doesn't work. And so for you're just developing these strategies out of necessity, but it allows you to find strategies that are universally better. And how many times is that true in our life where we've been accepting one strategy because it's the easiest or the obvious? But then the less obvious strategy is just the better strategy. And it's so hard to know that up front unless you're willing to question and try. So I love that about your story that maybe because of that challenge growing up with dyslexia, you found these strategies, whether it was thinking visually or whether it was, taking a job that some perceived as a step back, and you were able to then build those skills that got you to where you wanted to be.
Yeah, I mean, the traditional path, for the highly, highly qualified sort of former military officer is you go to like a Wharton or you go to whatever HBS or, some MBA program and you work your way up from there, right? That was never even something I seriously considered because of the GMAT and just because that's not the environment I thrive in, right? So it's sort of ironic, right? But I've had a lot of peers who went that route and you actually become a commodity because there's a ton of these guys that have done that and it's nothing against that path, right? Like they're brilliant, qualified folks, right? But you sort of become this commodification of the former military officer versus like people look at my path and I think they just want to scratch and dig deeper and go like, what is going on here? Like, and
that's something I show young employees constantly. And it's so hard to convince people of because there's so much noise saying, no, do it this way. But I try to convince them that early on in your career, and you can decide what that means. Is that the first 10 years? Is that in your 20s? Is that however you do it? But early on in your career, I tell them, do not optimize for salary. And now increasingly, there's people that are like, I just got to get the highest salary right now. Now, there's nothing wrong with optimizing for salary. You can make a lot of money that way. You can go job hop and stay in the same role, just get the better pay. But when you trace that all the way out, most of the people who do it end up just making really good salaries and staying in that job their whole life. So if that's what you're aspiring to, then great, do that. But if what you want to do is something more, meaningful or higher leverage, you want to start your own business, you want to have multiple income streams, you want to build something other people haven't thought of, then you have to be willing to do the things other people aren't willing to do. And usually that's prioritizing over salary. Sometimes you can have both, but prioritizing even higher the people that you're going to work with and the relationships you're building, as well as the skills you're developing. And that's both the hard skills, the technical skills, and the soft skills. Because that all adds up 10 years down the line to these incredible opportunities. And people think it's an overnight success or it's an obvious problem. I'm sure people look at you and go, oh yeah, it's obvious. He's Navy officer and then Google. And of course he's a CEO now. Well, again, like you said, at the time, it wasn't obvious. At the time, a lot of people think it made sense. And so, but you had that conviction to prioritize the experiences, prioritize what you thought was going to help you to build and grow. And then that added up to the outcome in a much more powerful way. So I think that's such a high leverage mindset that people can adopt of questioning traditional thinking, especially if the traditional outcome that goes with the traditional thinking isn't the one you're looking for. And then being willing to lean into trying things that you have your own conviction in for your own growth and building.
You just reminded me of a great conversation I had. I do a lot of like veteran mentorship calls, like folks just reach out on LinkedIn. And over in the course of like a 60-minute call, essentially we like mapped out this framework to think through this young man's next step. And I said, you essentially optimize for salary, right? You can optimize for, I think I said industry. You can optimize for brand. Google's a brand that is so absurdly powerful. I didn't actually really appreciate how powerful it was when I joined. Or we can optimize for like the skill experience, right? When I say skill experience, it's like if you want to get hired as a head of product somewhere, you first have to get some years of product experience under your belt, right? And it doesn't always matter where you get that, right? The better the brand, the perhaps the better, longer outcome, the more sort of ideal specific industry, the better, right? But almost to a certain degree, that can matter less, right? And so my point was, this guy was, hey, like let's figure out like scale from 0 to 3, like what are the priorities of these, right? And so for me, at the time, salary was not really that important, right? I actually took a pay cut getting out of the Navy to join Google, which it sounds absurd.
The military taking a pay cut.
But it's true, right? I highly optimized for industry and brand and not experience, right? Not at least overtly, right? Like I knew how to manage a calendar. That wasn't a skill set that was going to get me very far. What I did ultimately get from an experience standpoint is 2 years in a fast-growing cloud organization, gaining deep insight into organizational culture and how big tech companies work, which is like almost like the soft side of experience versus the hard side of experience, right?
Well, and you took it upon yourself in that role to start adding technical skills to automate things away with Google TypeScript. So then you found ways to create some of the skill growth on your own and add that, which is a great combination.
So, yeah. So, I mean, I think there's a lot there to work with. I should find that. We actually wrote up like a Google Doc. I should find that and like put it together as a blog or something. Cause I think that's a useful framework for a lot of people to think through.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I always tend to have a bias towards, like I said, skills and relationships early, because I think if you want to build something, I'm biased towards entrepreneurship as an entrepreneur. And so if you want to build something, you have to have the skills to do it. You have to know the people involved. Like that's what unlocks the door to entrepreneurship long-term. But not everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. And certainly if you want to go work at some really reputable place, they hire for brand a lot. I mean, Google, ton of doors for you. It can also open entrepreneurial doors as well. It's not to say it's exclusive, but when you have that better idea of long-term where I want to be, it starts to make it clear these are the trade-offs I might want to consider. And I would argue in most cases, salary should be the lowest short-term. If you're early in your career, early in your career,
there's not much juice to squeeze there, right? Like, it's like, what's being long-term? If you take that to its logical conclusion, right, like you're going to become a welder and go work on the slopes, right? Like you guys to make like $100,000 3 months or something crazy, right? Sure. Like, I mean, that thinking gets you that logical conclusion. So like, let's have a realistic conversation on like, where do you really draw the line? Yeah. And is it valuable for your future self to be over optimizing on that? I will say to the brand piece, I touched on this. I didn't really appreciate how valuable that was, but I can't tell you how many times, chatting with people, they'd say, wow, you got a job at Google out of the Navy. Like, how is that possible? I was like, I mean, I'm an EA. Like, it's not quite the same thing. And they're like, no, you're at Google. Who cares what your title is? And it's like, yeah, well, that's fascinating. You're saying that. Cause like, 6 months ago, people were like, you're going to take that role, even if it's at Google, right? It's just a fascinating kind of mind shift. And there's some same cognitive bias there that I cannot wrap my mind around, but it exists, and it exists in a big way. And
do things different, because there's going to be people who see that and go, oh man, obviously you take the pay cut just to get your foot in the door because it's Google and because you can open up new doors later. And there's going to be people like, this is the dumbest idea you've ever had. It's going to hurt your salary. It's going to hurt. You're not going to be getting the experience you want. You're optimizing for all the wrong things. And so,
it's incredible though, like what a title means to some people. And I will say, like, I probably had 100+ conversations with folks getting out. A lot of them were former junior officers with a year of EA experience. And I can tell you, not a single one of them followed my path, right? So I don't know what to make of that, except that, there are, I said earlier, there's no like secret phrase to put on your resume to get an interview. But I will say, like, these kinds of EA roles are very much available, right, for the person who's willing to take them and kind of start at, quote unquote, in the mailroom, right, and work their way up. And I actually didn't come up with that idea entirely myself, right? It was a colleague, a friend of mine, who had done the same thing at Facebook, and she kind of opened my eyes to it. So when I did get that call from the recruiter, I was already kind of mentally prepared for it. So anyway, we're spending a lot of time talking about like that exit from college or that exit from something like the military and like those first few steps. I think there's a lot of value in it because I think it's incredibly daunting, almost paralyzing for people. So hopefully some of that's useful.
Yeah, certainly is. So then, obviously you go from Google into some other tech jobs. You had the experience where you started to get more technical skills working on the red team. From there, moving on to be a director of operations for Team Password, and then on to DreamFactory, to your current role where now you are the chief executive officer. And so when you think about, post Google, then what were some of those skills that you started to add, or what were some of the high leverage ideas, mindsets, things that started to layer on that got you to where you are now? Because that's a pretty short time frame. We're talking, we just covered a big time frame as far as the percentage of your career so far. But when we think about the more recent developments and how things are starting to go for you, what through those roles were some of the key decisions or learnings that you feel made the biggest impact for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, to your point about like essentially like building relationships, right? When I came out to Silicon Valley, I joined a reserve unit with the Defense Innovation Unit. And it was through there I met a ton of folks kind of in this defense tech kind of ecosystem. And it was one of those gentlemen who I actually tried to help get a job at Google. He ended up getting a job in VC. So when I was looking for my next step, I went to him and said, hey, like, you know me well, like, what do you, these kind of, what I'm looking for, what do you think? And he was the one who pointed me in the direction of this firm. So I work for a private equity firm that essentially buys companies that for a reason maybe haven't raised that next round, or there needs to be sort of a transition in ownership for whatever reason. And so we're buying, products with really good bones, good tech, typically like a good customer base, but they're never going to be that unicorn. And in the VC world, like, if you, at a certain point, if you don't have potential to hit those like crazy, 100x numbers, right? Like you're not going to raise the next round. And so really, really, really cool opportunity because you got these great little companies that is looking for people to roll up their sleeves and get shit done, right? So I jumped into Team Password, obviously background in cybersecurity, small team of like less than 5 employees. And I just had a blast kind of, building that team, building the morale and camaraderie, and just looking for those kind of small optimization opportunities, little things on the website, a lot around messaging, right? And a lot of that time was really just cutting my teeth, kind of figuring things out, getting my feet on the ground. And then, there was a project within the fund to bring some companies together, which was called Integrate.io. DreamFactory was sort of tangential to that, right? They're kind of like sister companies, right? And for a period of time, we were sort of running them as one, and then we sort of broke them out again, right? So things are very fluid in this kind of environment, right? So LinkedIn doesn't always, LinkedIn is optimized for like pretty clean cut, like start end dates, right? But like not in that way. And, to name one lesson is really hard because I've just learned so much. I think a lot of what I've really cherished is spending a lot of time thinking about the market and thinking about the nuance around messaging, in the space of ETL, ELT, data movement, right? Whether they're talking about APIs, whether they're talking about like more traditional data pipelines, there's like a million different ways to solve any problem, right? I mean, you work in Salesforce, the Salesforce integration space, right? Like you can probably, if you someone put a gun to your head, you could probably list like 100 different ways to move data between two different, a source and destination. And so everyone's like playing this game of trying to name their thing and make their thing different and make their thing sound better. And well, in reality, there's like really, really specific niche cases that are ideal for all these different things. It's like programming languages, right? Like, why are people still creating programming? Because there's always these like off cases where it actually is worth somebody investing the time of creating a new programming language to do this specific set of tasks like better, right?
Yep.
And the same thing goes for products, right? Like product will just abjectly fail if it really doesn't have any true differentiation. And so I just had a blast with that. And, DreamFactory is actually a company that was developed as a Salesforce integration tool.
Yeah.
The idea being that you could just connect to any backend database, generate a live API. And, Salesforce obviously was first to market with the REST API. What was that, like 2099? They've always been really, really great at just being able to ingest anything, the REST API. That was sort of the idea, right? Is like create an API on anything. It's a REST API, so you can send it through any firewall without opening ports, right? And then ingest it to Salesforce. And we've seen massive adoption against tons of other use cases, and we didn't really have a good way of describing this thing. And so what I've been doing, and I'm just having so much fun doing it, is actually creating a new category and creating all this new messaging and testing it and getting in front of customers and constantly just kind of asking these questions, shaking people down and saying like, does that sound right? Does that actually sound like what we're doing? Like how would you describe it? Right?
If you were to break that process down, right? You just come into one of these new companies, in this case, DreamFactory, and you go, all right, we've got to really take a hard look at our messaging, the market, how our solution is positioned. What are the steps? What should people, maybe someone's in marketing, maybe they're a leader at a company or they have their own business and they're trying to figure out. So when you think about that in terms of a system, what does that system look like to go from messy, bad messaging, what specific steps are you taking to get to clear position in the market, strong messaging, resonating with clients? You mentioned some things, but I want to get into what are those steps exactly that you have found to be effective?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, the first piece of Xenon is typically cleaning up sort of the operations and marketing and sales, right? So we have what we call the playbook, which is like the nitty gritty, down and dirty of like, how do you make sure where all your money is? And so we've got sort of set systems, right? So all your invoicing is going to go through Stripe, and all your, finances are going to be through Xero, and you're going to get onto like one of these CRMs, right, for tracking of deal flow, and you're going to use this set of sort of marketing automation tools to make sure you've built this sort of like repeatable marketing process and pipeline that allows for like relatively small, amount of work on a weekly basis to kind of keep that flywheel going, right? So we're really big into SEO, which is its own fascinating topic right now, which we don't have to get into. But the messaging piece is really, really challenging. And I'd say the first thing you do is you got to uncover and dig through all the data you have and figure out what you know. And so, for instance, like one of the first things I did with Team Password is we went through and tried to figure out like, who are our customers and what are their industries, right? And that seems really straightforward, but it's not, right? Like, you think you could just like run that through one of these like, data set tools, right? And just kind of plop it all out. But it's much more nuanced, right? Then often what you're talking about is like, you're being used within like a part of a company. And really often the customer's the only one that can give you that data. Mm-hmm. So, we spent like $4,000 on t-shirts and hats and did like a big giveaway and had folks complete a survey. And that was one of the best sets of data we ever got. And what became really clear for us there was actually that agencies were like our power users, right? Which is not what we expected, right? We expected actually that the like tech companies were using us, right? But we saw a lot of agencies, and the agencies seemed like the ones that were often growing and they often were the most engaged. And I've stepped away from that company, right? But a lot of the early messaging I worked with them on and the ultimate sort of, I think, strategic direction that there's a huge opportunity for is around becoming not a password manager, but actually like a password sharing tool. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think kind of bleed into the next step is is just being really, really curious when you talk to customers and asking about like, what are you really doing? Like, how are you really using this, right? As an entrepreneur, as a builder or founder, you're sort of building out what you think is useful. And as we sort of know with so many different examples, like what you think folks are going to want isn't often what they want. It's often sort of quite the contrary, right? And so that's where like, you talk about like agile methodology and building MVPs and everything else, right? But the fact is like you're getting this product out into the world, and then like the way folks actually use it is often a mystery, unless you're really getting in front of them and talking with them. So
out of that, yeah. You mentioned doing like a big giveaway. Is this something where you have marketing folks reaching out? Is this account managers that already know the companies that are reaching out? Do you personally do it because you want to hear it direct from the customer? And then, I'm sure that even though they're a customer, maybe even a happy customer, sometimes it's kind of like sales. Like, do they really want to take the time to talk to you about it? So what strategies have you seen be effective for getting that information? I'm sure if you just send a blank survey out, like maybe one person will respond. So what have you seen actually work?
So we use Intercom across all the companies.
Okay.
At Team Password, we use Intercom very aggressively. So it's not just like the chatbot on the website. We actually use it for all of our content. Like how we use it for communications, email communications. And so we've got all of our customers in there, and we've got all their emails. And so you can just throw together a simple email with use my name, saying like, hey, we want to say thank you to all of our customers. I think we did it around like end of year. And so we've got this short survey and a giveaway, right? And so if we ask that you spend like 2 minutes and answer these like 5 questions and get like a hat or t-shirt. And it's funny, like you wouldn't think people would do much for a hat or t-shirt, but they will. Like that is by far, I think, the best giveaway, especially if it's a cool t-shirt. And we made a point to really work with some interesting designers and find some, cool designs. And yeah, that worked really well, but you have to sort of have like a giveaway, right? There's got to be something more to it. And the giveaway's got to be significantly more for what you're asking. Also, though, like, no one wants to be reached out to out of the blue with an ask, right? Like, it's important to have constant communication and engagement with customers, right? And that just means like the occasional email from me saying, hey, this is what we're doing, this is what we're working on, the occasional, the monthly newsletter, cool stuff, like end of year note, with pictures of the team, talking about like, what our plans were for the break and that kind of thing. Like, building a real relationship, even if everyone doesn't open those every email, right? You're going to slowly kind of build that relationship over time. But like, as a lot of companies are finding out, especially in this environment, right? Giving away, earbuds often won't get people in a sales call, right? So like this isn't like a model that works perfectly for everything, right? But a relatively small survey with an audience you've already been nurturing and working with, that does work.
Well, so you did ads, and you did in the survey, you say small survey. Is this 2 questions? Is it 15 questions? Were there any questions that you found to be most insightful or important to ask?
I think it was like 7, and we worked hard to make them really, really clear to answer. It was like a type form survey, and it was simple stuff like, of these organizations, like industries, like, which do you most closely align with, right? Size of your company. I think we actually asked for sort of number of users in Team Password versus like number of potential users or number of like, or the individuals in the company, that kind of thing, right? But yeah, you don't make it, more than 5-6 questions, because you're going to have a massive job off towards the end, and your data is not going to be clean.
Any of them specific, narrowed in, were any of them more open, free form of like, tell us your favorite part of the thing, or what?
Yeah, I think we did have that. I think we had like, what do you love most about Team Password? What do you hate most, or something like that?
Cool.
But I mean, the questions we wanted answered were around expansion opportunities. So like number of users currently versus number of potential users, and then the industry piece. And I was actually, you'll often be surprised by like what comes back with these and like what you'll learn. It's often not what you think you'll learn, but for me, that was huge. And then as much as you can, get in front of customers. And so that often means like talking to your support team and telling them like, anytime you've got a customer, you're jumping on a call with a customer from like this industry or from these companies, invite me. I want to be on that call. And what you do is you drop on and you say, hey, I'm the CEO. I want to take the opportunity just to say hi, and thanks for jumping on to work through this with our team. And if you can, sort of casually like try and get get some answers. Hey, we've been seeing a lot of this, and this. Does that make sense to you? Is that a feature that you'd like to see, or do you think there'd be value in that? Like, there's a very casual way you can tease out some really valuable information. They're talking to the CEO, right? Like, if they like this product, they plan on using it, they're going to be excited to talk to you and give them their mind, give you their mind, right? And talk about what they want to see and what they don't. But yeah, I think a lot of it really is around curiosity, right? Like this idea that Team Password is not actually a password manager, but is a password sharing platform is like really kind of antithetical, but it's at the heart of like the best use cases we had, right? Mm-hmm. And I stepped away before I think I really kind of got to own that problem. But with DreamFactory, it's a similar conversation where like folks aren't using us for traditional API management, but that's the category that existed, right? They're using us for API generation, which is like this other thing, right? Around more rapidly building open standard, secure integrations into data sources, right? And so how do you sort of capture that in some relatively short kind of H1s and H2s? Well, it requires a lot of testing, requires a lot of talking to a lot of customers, a lot of testing, and then as much as you can, just getting in front of them, right? So it's a lot of fun if you love this stuff, if you love tech.
I do. So got it as well. Awesome. Well, a couple more questions we'll wrap up here. So I want to transition a little bit. When we think about leverage, think about anywhere that we put small effort in, get massive output back, right? And it doesn't even have to be small effort, just that the multiplication of the effort is where the magic is. We've actually talked about a ton of high leverage skills for developing your career. So far, we've talked about even there, I think that's a really high leverage way to multiply how fast and how well you can iterate on your messaging, your product to get those insights is super valuable. So thanks for sharing that. Are there any other areas where you've seen in your business or, in your career where you're like, this is just way easier for me or for our company, and other people just don't realize that this could be a way they could be getting much more value out of this activity? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Oh, wow. Why? I guess I'd say getting in front of customers. I'm not sure I said that much here. And I think there's just so much value. And it's not, folks will say, well, it's really hard. Like, we can email our whole customer base and no one's going to even open the email. Well, you got to find them when they're ready to talk to you, right? And that's often support. So, this is where you need to have like a relatively lean, efficient process of communicating across organizations, right? Like your support team has to be comfortable bringing the CEO into a support call when they might be otherwise embarrassed because like here's this problem that they couldn't solve and it required a customer actually get on a call, right? Mm-hmm. Like these aren't necessarily like this sounds easy, but it's actually not. Mm-hmm. But if you can get in front of the right people and ask the right questions, it's going to just open up a whole bunch of really interesting conversations for you and some insight. And that's where like it's important to think about like, which customer is this the actual like an ICP or is this like a fringe kind of use case, right? Uh-huh. But that's the thing is like you actually don't know until you get in front of customers and you figure out like what you think might be your ICP may not.
For those who don't know what we mean, ICP saying ideal customer profile, right?
Exactly. If you were to build this sort of ideal customer in your mind, what would they look like? And I mean, ideally, you have one or two of those already, right? And you can kind of lean heavily on thinking about everything from their point of view, building with them in mind, right?
Yeah. That's awesome. So as you look at AI and kind of a lot of the trends and everything that's coming with AI, is there anything you're either worried about that you see disrupting your industry or your space, or excited about that you see being a massive opportunity for yourself and others with how AI is going to change and in and of itself open up some really big leverage opportunities?
I'd say overall I'm very, very excited, right? There's change happening. I think anyone who's been around long enough will tell you that trying to predict where the change will be is a fool's errand, right? Like you just never know. The best you can do is like follow the daily newsletters and just keep up with what's going on and listen to the folks in the industry who seem to have their ear to the ground and know what's going on. I'm not, there's sort of the Luddites out there who are like fearful of technology. I'm a bit of probably a tech optimist in the sense that AI is this sort of like high-speed train that's coming at us one way or another. It feels kind of silly to try and stop the train. It's just unrealistic too. Uh-huh. There's going to be massive disruption, right, to labor markets, to all sorts of different things. And it's on each of us to sort of be on top of it, right? It's no different than literally the Luddites, right? Who were breaking looms because they thought they sort of, even because they were going to take their jobs, right? Like to a certain degree, we're all this sort of like antiquated analog system.
Yeah.
And AI is going to come for a lot of parts of the market and a lot of the ways that we have traditionally added value economically. But at the end of the day, like we can do so much more than an AI can, right? And it's about adapting and being on top of these changes in a way that allows you to find sort of the opportunities, right? And so for me, that means like I'm not a developer traditionally, but wow, like put me in front of a Copilot ChatGPT, and I can turn out some good looking code, right? I'm dyslexic, right? Like don't give me a 20-page document and ask me to summarize it. But guess what ChatGPT is really good at, right? I'm dyslexic. I'm horrible at spelling. Right? I used to pre-Grammarly, I'd have to proof an email, read the email 3 times. I'd have to just save it and come back a few hours later. I'd have to print it out and read it aloud to myself, right? To make sure, like an important email, to make sure I didn't have typos. How incredible is it to be able to write down like a poorly worded, grammatically incorrect, series of sentences and ask ChatGPT to reformat it for me in my own voice, right? Like for me, it's like the applications are endless. It's this playground for me that is just beyond exciting, but I'm not normal. So, the advice for that, I think for anyone is like, this is coming. Anyways, I can take your job, but somebody doing AI will eventually. And so like we are all responsible for our own future and success, and you got to stay on top.
It's awesome. Well, Terrence, it's been a great conversation. If people want to find you, connect with you, maybe they're interested in what you're doing with DreamFactory and, helping people really quickly build secure internal APIs, or maybe they're just interested in your journey, is LinkedIn the best place to go, or what would you tell people?
Yeah, LinkedIn's best. You can reach out to DreamFactory as well. I'm not on Twitter or X or whatever. But LinkedIn's a great place. I try and sort of make myself available to folks who reach out, who want to chat. So if you've got like a burning question, reach out. Especially if we're veteran, right? Like I try and chat with veterans, give them some advice whenever possible.
That's awesome, Terrence. Well, thank you so much for being on today, and keep in touch.
Thanks, Spencer. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, before you go, I have a small request. Our mission is to empower as many people as possible to maximize their potential through the power of leverage. Could you help us in this mission by leaving a review on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube? And if you know just one person who would benefit from today's episode, would you please share it with them? Your support means the world to us, and we are thrilled to have you in the community. Thank you for being a part of our journey and helping us grow. You can find show notes for today's show and past shows at lessonsinleverage.com, which also has links to connect with me personally and connect with our various podcast channels across your favorite social networks. A big thanks to Solve.cloud, who sponsored this episode. They're a group of expert consultants that help SaaS and financial services companies to implement, optimize, and manage Salesforce.com. They can help you with custom integration solutions and are helping customers to implement some of the most important generative AI technologies. You can find them at solved.cloud. That's SOLVD.cloud is the URL. Thanks again, and we'll talk soon.